As a child, I was taught the old proverb, patience is a virtue. But boy, it's hard. Those of us who have children or have been on a longest journey with one will, I'm sure, have heard the oft-repeated mantra, "Are we nearly there yet?" We don't want to wait for things. We want it now, particularly in our buy now, pay later culture. If you can't afford something, don't worry. You can pay for it across 732 monthly payments. It's why McDonald's is one of the biggest brands in the world. It's why most of us have a credit card in our wallets. It's why Amazon Prime is popular, and it's why shops are now open on Sundays. Although I found it quite ironic when I saw the news and the pictures earlier in the week of cars queuing for miles for fast food. I remember waiting what seemed at the time like an age for my exam results to come out. We just can't avoid waiting. It's a fact of life. We wait for results from the doctor. We wait often impatiently for friends to reply to our messages. We wait for special events to come round. As a child growing up in the 80s, I took it for granted that my football team, Liverpool, would more than likely win the league each spring. But in the 90s, it all changed. We just stopped winning the league. We've got close a few times over the last 30 years, but without actually winning it. It's been extra hard to see our arch rivals across the East Lancs win it 13 times. This season, however, it was different. We quickly built up a healthy points gap over who everybody thought was the best team in the league, Manchester City. And by mid-March, we'd opened up a gap of 25 points. We needed just 2 wins from our last 9 games to win what would be our first league title in 30 years. And then the season was halted because of coronavirus. Panic struck. Concern that the season may be avoided had crossed the minds of most Liverpool fans. But last week, that glint of light, the first few games of the remaining fixtures was announced. We've had to wait, but hopefully, for me anyway, the wait will end soon. Waiting is a theme that we also see throughout the Bible. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation, but he had to wait for his promised child. After the exodus from Egypt, the nation of Israel complained and grumbled in the wilderness and had to wait 40 years to reach the promised land. God announced to Adam and Eve in the garden that one day a descendant of theirs would reverse the fall, but it took thousands of years for him to arrive. We are promised the second coming of Christ, as his first disciples were, but we are still waiting to see the promise fulfilled. So far in our journey through the book of Habakkuk, we have eavesdropped into a conversation that the prophet Habakkuk was having with God. First, Habakkuk had asked God why his own nation of Judah was not being disciplined for their wickedness. God responded, explaining that he would discipline Judah and the means by which he would do this. Whilst trusting in God's goodness and sovereignty, Habakkuk brazenly went back to God, asking him to clarify his decision-making and daring to question the means by which he was going to discipline the nation of Judah. He questioned how God could stand by in silence as a wicked nation, the Chaldeans, harshly overcame his own, less wicked nation. So what happened next? Chapter 2 starts out, "Are you not from everlasting? I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint." He fully expects God to answer his complaint. He's likely expecting a rebuke for his audacious claims. So he's probably stood there bracing for God's response. Or as Boris would say, he's staying alert. If you pray, what do you do once you've prayed? Do you open your eyes and give your prayers no further thought? Or are you like Habakkuk, aware that God is listening? Wait expectantly, trusting that God will answer. But Habakkuk not only waited for God's response, he also thought about his own response to what he thought God would say. Do you, like Habakkuk, take what and how you speak to God seriously? We so often think about the words that we say to others after the matter. We say to ourselves, I wish I'd not said that, or I was perhaps a bit insensitive in saying that. I know I do anyway. Do you over your words to God in the same way? Do you mull over whether you were reverent enough? Do you regret times when you realised your prayers were disrespectful? Of course, we shouldn't avoid speaking to God out of fear of praying the wrong thing. God knows we're imperfect. He knows we have a tendency to selfishness and even doubt. But by his grace, those who trust in his Son's work of salvation, he calls his children. And he longs to hear from his children. And his relationship with his children is perfectly secure for all eternity. But as our understanding and our appreciation of his holiness and our own sinfulness grows, so we should think more carefully about how we approach him. Perhaps, even on occasion, recognizing and repenting of the words and thoughts we direct to him. Reflecting on how we communicate with God is a way that he can shape and mould us into the men and women he desires us to be. As expected, God responds, but not with the rebuke that Habakkuk had likely expected. Verse 2, And the Lord answered me, Write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. God's first words were to instruct Habakkuk to write down the vision. God has communicated to us in a number of ways. Firstly, he's communicated to us through the person of Jesus, but he's also communicated in speech, through his words of decree, like when he spoke creation into being in Genesis, through his words of personal address, like when he instructed Adam not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, through the speech of human lips, like when the Old Testament prophet spoke, Thus saith the Lord. But as well as orally, God also communicates to us through written words, whether from the finger of God, like the tablets that God wrote the Ten Commandments on, or the writing on the wall at Belshazzar's feast. The advantage of written word is that they are accessible to more people. They are less open to misinterpretation and can also be accurately kept for future generations. Habakkuk was told to write the vision down concisely on tablets, so it was plain for people to understand. Let's read on to verse 3 now. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. It seems slow, but wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. God makes clear that he wants Habakkuk to write the vision down, because it will not be realized straight away. I know what Kate and I are like at remembering. We need to write down everything, otherwise we'll forget. And it's the same principle here. God is showing Habakkuk what will in time come of the Chaldeans, but not yet. It may seem a while off and slow coming, just like the journey to my mum seems an awful long way off to my girls. God says they will need to wait for it. But it will come. And how did Habakkuk know that it would come? Because God said it would, and God does not lie. Every word that God communicates is true. So every promise that God makes in the Bible, he has kept or will keep when the time is right. But it will come at God's time of appointing, rather than our time of appointing. It will not be late, like I so often can be. It will come at its appointed time. The author of Ecclesiastes reminds us that there is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. In Paul's letter to the church in Rome, we are told that at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. We may not always understand God's timing, but we have to submit our plans and trust that things will happen in God's appointed time. We, like the nation of Judah, need to wait patiently, expectantly. We live in a frustrating world with frustrating people, of which we are some of them. When we see injustices, we should not doubt God is able or wants to act, but rather trust that he will act when the time is right. Let's finally take a look at verses 4 and 5. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It's not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by faith. Moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects as his own all peoples. Here God compares the characteristics of two different types of people: the proud man and the man of faith. Let's start with the proud man. The proud man is puffed up and not upright. God is referring directly here to the Chaldeans, who were an arrogant, proud, and insatiably greedy nation, who basked in their own power, who self-assuredly celebrated their own success with much wine. In the book of Proverbs we read, "Everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished." So I hope you agree that you don't want to be like this man. So what the other man, the man of faith? In contrast, the proud man, he is not upright. The man of faith is described as a righteous or upright man. These verses are contrasting self-righteous pride with the righteousness that comes through faith in God. Pride and faith are polar opposites, like black and white, or north and south. We see this phrase, "the righteous shall live by his faith," quoted 3 times in the New Testament, twice by the Apostle Paul. It was, in some ways, the springboard for the Protestant Reformation in the early 16th century. In 1519, Martin Luther was sat preparing lectures for his students on Paul's epistle to the Romans, when he reached verse 17 of chapter 1, which quotes, "The righteous shall live by faith." In a moment of illumination, he realized that the righteousness described here is not God's righteousness, but that which he provides for his people. Luther had lived many years in anguish considering his own unrighteousness, but now God had opened his eyes to an alien righteousness that was not his own, but Christ's. As Christians, we are not justified by our own works, but by Christ's work on our behalf. When God looks at the Christian, he judges us according to Christ's righteousness. Or to put it simply, his goodness. We are all, or were all, either, like the Chaldeans, pridefully trusting in our own righteousness, or sadly despairing in our unrighteousness. But God, speaking through the prophet Isaiah and the Apostle Paul, reminds us that our good works and righteousness are like filthy rags in contrast to Christ's righteousness, which is perfect. It's because we are self-orientated and self-interested. So don't be like the Chaldeans and delight in your own sense of importance, thinking that your way is best. Don't look inwardly at yourself. Instead, turn to Christ and receive his righteousness and wait patiently, expectantly, and excitedly for his return.